The quiet beginning. The night sky above Los Angeles was clear, filled with small stars that seemed to rest silently over the city lights. It was the evening of a film reunion, a rare moment where the cast of a movie that had once changed their lives would come together again. Cameras waited, fans stood behind barricades, and inside the hall, soft music played beneath the sound of quiet laughter. Keanu Reeves arrived early, as he often did. His presence was calm, simple, and humble, as if he carried no weight of fame. He walked in with a light smile, greeting the crew members by name, thanking the waiters who served the drinks. There was no rush, no show of pride. He liked silence more than applause, and it showed in the way he moved. Slow, kind, steady. Sandra Bullock entered almost unnoticed. She wore no bright dress, no heavy makeup. Her beauty was quiet, the kind that did not ask to be seen but could not be ignored. When her eyes met Keanu's across the room, something shifted. It was not surprise. It was recognition. A quiet knowing that time had passed, but connection had not. People had seen them together many times before. Interviews, movie sets, charity events. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the long years between projects, or maybe it was how both had learned to love peace over noise. Sandra walked toward him slowly, her heels making small echoes against the marble floor. "You still arrive before everyone," she said, her voice light but warm. Keanu smiled softly. "I just like to see the room before the crowd," still avoiding attention. She teased. "Always," he answered, and they both laughed. For a moment, they stood in silence, and the laughter faded into something deeper. There was affection in their eyes, but not the kind the crowd imagined. It was respect, an understanding that went beyond what tabloids ever guessed. They had shared long nights of filming, of exhaustion, of laughter that made tears fall. And in those moments they had learned something rare, admiration without demand. As they talked, the cameras around them started clicking, but neither seemed to care. There was ease between them, the kind that only years of friendship could build. Still, beneath that peace, there was something unspoken, something fragile. "It's been a while," Sandra said softly. "You look calmer somehow." "Life slowed me down," Keanu replied. "And I realize slowing down isn't losing speed. It's seeing things clearer." She looked at him, her smile turning thoughtful. "That's something I wish I learned earlier." A few reporters passed by, whispering, their flashes breaking the quiet rhythm of their words. Yet the two actors stood as if they were somewhere else, back in time, on a set where youth and laughter were constant companions. As the evening went on, they found themselves seated beside each other at the long table. The dinner lights were golden, casting warmth over the guests. Someone raised a toast to friendship, and the room filled with applause. But Sandra was looking at Keanu, watching the way he clapped gently, never louder than needed. And for a brief second, she wondered what it was that made his kindness so effortless. The host began asking questions about the old days. Who was the most serious actor, who forgot lines, who made everyone laugh? When it was Sandra's turn, she looked around, smiling politely. "The most serious?" she said. "That would be Keanu, but in the best way. He listens more than he speaks. That's rare." The audience laughed kindly, and Keanu's eyes lowered, a faint blush touching his cheeks. When the host turned to him, he paused, thinking carefully before speaking. "What I remember most," he said, "was how Sandra made the hardest days feel light. She reminded everyone that even pressure could be fun if you smiled through it." The applause came again, louder this time. But it was not the noise that made Sandra's heart move. It was his tone, honest, steady, like a quiet confession that didn't need to be dressed in grand words. After dinner, people began to drift away toward the dance floor or the balcony. Sandra excused herself, stepping outside for a moment. She leaned on the railing, feeling the cold wind brush her hair. She thought of the years since their last film, of how much both of them had lived and lost. She didn't hear Keanu approach until he spoke. "Too many cameras inside?" She smiled. "Maybe I just needed air, or maybe I needed silence." He nodded, standing beside her. For a long while, neither spoke. The city spread below them, endless and glowing. Then Keanu said quietly, You know, people always ask what I love most about acting. I think it's moments like this. Real ones. No cameras. No scripts. And what do you love most about people? She asked. He thought for a moment. The ones who stay kind when they don't have to. Sandra's gaze softened. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at him. Really looked. Under the soft balcony lights, his face carried stories she knew but never heard fully. Loss, patience, hope. That's something we both learned the hard way, she whispered. Maybe that's why we understand each other, he said. A quiet breeze passed, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden below. Somewhere inside, music began again, slow and low. Sandra turned slightly toward him. Do you ever think, she said, that maybe people see us as a story we never wrote? Keanu looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. Maybe. But sometimes stories others tell about us remind us who we really are. She smiled faintly. And who are we then? He paused, a small light of amusement in his eyes. Two people still learning how to love without breaking. The words hung in the air, gentle yet sharp enough to stay. Inside, someone called their names for a group photo. Sandra sighed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. Back to the spotlight, she said with a small laugh. Keanu nodded, offering his hand in a quiet gesture. After you. As they walked back inside, the cameras waited once more, the flashes chasing every step. Yet between them, something invisible began to form again. Something stronger than nostalgia, and somewhere deep inside both hearts, an unspoken thought began to grow. Maybe this night was the beginning of another story they didn't expect to tell. When they sat down again, the host smiled and asked them a playful question. So tell us, Keanu and Sandra, after all these years, what do you love most about each other? Keanu's hand rested on the table, his fingers brushing the stem of his glass. He didn't answer yet. Sandra's eyes turned to him, waiting, curious, nervous even. But before he could speak, the room lights flickered. A small technical glitch, a power shift. People murmured softly. The lights returned, but the question stayed hanging between them. Unanswered. Electric. Sandra laughed lightly to ease the tension, but her heart was racing. Because for the first time that night, she wondered what he might actually say. And deep down, Keanu wondered too, if the truth he carried quietly for years was finally ready to be spoken. The evening continued, but nothing felt the same anymore. Something had changed, and both of them knew it. And as the music swelled again, the story that began with a quiet smile was now moving toward a truth that neither had expected to face. What the silence tried to say, the night had turned softer after the brief power flicker, but something inside both of them had changed. The moment the lights dimmed, it was as if the universe had taken a deep breath, pausing everything for a few seconds, letting time stretch between what was said and what was not. When the lights came back, Sandra looked at Keanu and smiled, but her smile carried a question that no one else noticed. The audience went back to their laughter. The host made a few jokes, and the waiters began refilling glasses, but for the two of them, the world had gone oddly quiet. Keanu leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Guess that question will have to wait, he said softly. Sandra nodded, though her heart disagreed. She wanted to hear it. She wanted to know what he would have said if the lights hadn't gone out. She wanted to know what he really loved most about her. Not the public version, not the friendly joke for cameras, but the truth beneath the silence. As the night continued, more guests joined them at the table. Stories of old memories filled the air, how the director once forgot a key scene, how they all ate pizza on the floor during late-night shoots. Laughter rippled across the room, yet Sandra found herself lost in thought, watching the reflection of the chandelier lights in her glass of water. Keanu noticed. He always noticed. You're far away again, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. Maybe I'm just thinking too much. Or remembering, he said. She looked at him, her eyes soft. You do that too? Every day, he admitted. Some memories stay even when you want to outgrow them. And some memories heal you when you least expect, she said. Their conversation slowed again. as if the rest of the room faded. Then, before either could speak again, a voice called from behind them. "Keanu! Sandra! Can we have a picture? One for the reunion post?" They turned and smiled politely for the camera. The photographer counted down, and the flash caught the moment. Keanu's hand resting lightly near hers on the table, their smiles soft and almost secret. Later, when that photo appeared online, fans around the world would say they looked like two souls speaking in silence. And maybe they were. When the event ended, Sandra stepped out into the parking area first. Her car was waiting, but she hesitated before getting in. She turned around and saw Keanu walking toward her, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his pace unhurried. "You're leaving without saying goodbye?" he asked gently. "I thought you were still inside," she said. "I was," he replied, "but I didn't want the night to end without thanking you." "For what?" she asked. He looked at her with that calm sincerity that never felt rehearsed. "For being the same person you were all those years ago, kind, grounded, funny, real." Her throat tightened for a second, the weight of genuine words pressing softly against her chest. "You haven't changed much either," she said quietly. "Maybe just more quiet, more thoughtful," he smiled. "Quiet isn't always peace, but sometimes it's all I know how to be." They stood under the pale glow of the streetlight. For a while, neither moved. Cars passed. The city hummed. But their world felt still. Finally, Keanu broke the silence. "Can I walk you to your car?" She laughed gently. "We're already standing next to it." He grinned, that faint boyish grin that people rarely saw anymore. "Then I guess my timing's perfect." Sandra shook her head, amused. "You still say things like that?" "Only when I mean them," he replied. She looked at him one last time before opening the car door. "Good night, Keanu. Good night, Sandra," he said. Stepping back slightly as her car drove away, Keanu stood there for a few seconds longer, hands in pockets, eyes following the taillights fading into the distance. There was something in that moment he didn't name, something that lived between gratitude and longing. The next morning, Sandra woke earlier than usual. She made coffee, sat by the kitchen window, and replayed the night in her mind. There was something about Keanu's eyes when he had thanked her, something unguarded, something human. She couldn't quite name it, but it felt like truth trying to reach her. On impulse, she sent him a message. "Good seeing you last night. Maybe we should talk sometime, not at an event, just talk." She didn't expect an immediate reply, but a few minutes later her phone buzzed. "Would like that. Coffee or walk?" She smiled. "Walk." He sent a thumbs-up emoji, simple and quiet, just like him. Later that evening, they met at a small park near the hills. It was quiet, with trees whispering in the wind and the smell of earth after a short rain. Keanu wore a black jacket, hands tucked into his pockets. Sandra wore a cap to stay unnoticed. They started walking slowly along the path, their footsteps matching rhythm without trying. "You really like silence, don't you?" she said after a while. He smiled softly. "Silence tells you who you are when the world stops talking." "And what does it tell you?" He looked ahead. "That peace doesn't come from noise or people. It comes from honesty." She nodded. "You've always had a way of saying things that sound simple but hit deep." "Maybe that's because I mean them," he said. They walked past a small pond. Ducks floated lazily on the surface. Sandra bent down, picking up a small leaf, watching it drift across the water. "You ever think about how strange it is," she said softly, "that after all these years, after all the chaos, we still find our way back to talking like this?" "Not strange," he said. "Some people stay connected even when they stop speaking. They just wait for time to make it right again." She looked at him, her voice quieter now. "And you think time made it right for us?" Keanu turned toward her, his expression unreadable for a second. "I think we never broke what mattered. We just paused it." His words sat between them like a small truth finally spoken. Sandra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked ahead, hands in her jacket pockets, her thoughts a storm of calm and confusion. When she finally turned back, she said softly, "You never answered that question." He frowned lightly. "Which one?" "The one the host asked last night. What do you love most about me?" Keanu's steps slowed. The path stretched ahead, quiet and dim under the fading sun. He looked at her, his face thoughtful, as if weighing honesty against caution. "That's a dangerous question," he said after a moment. "Why?" she asked, her tone soft but insistent. "Because real answers don't sound like interviews," he said. "Then give me the real one." He took a breath. "The thing I love most about you," he began slowly, "is how you make people feel safe just by being around. You don't have to try. You just do, and I think that's rare. I think that's beautiful." She didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight again. "That's a lot to take in." "Then take your time," he said quietly. They kept walking, the silence between them no longer heavy but warm. After a while, she asked softly, "And what do you think people love most about you?" He smiled faintly. "Probably the opposite thing." "What do you mean?" "People expect me to be strong, quiet, steady. But sometimes I wish someone would see the mess behind it." Her steps slowed. "I see it," she said. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither moved. Something deep shifted inside that quiet space between them. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was understanding. The kind that doesn't rush, doesn't demand, just exists quietly, like a heartbeat beneath calm water. They walked until the sky turned orange. Before leaving, Sandra said, "Next time, coffee's on me." "Next time," Keanu repeated with a small smile. "Don't pretend you weren't hoping for one," she teased. He laughed softly. "You caught me." As they said goodbye, their hands brushed lightly, an accidental touch, but one that stayed long after they parted ways. That night, Sandra couldn't sleep. She replayed every word, every glance, every silence. She realized that for years, she had avoided thinking about how much she valued his presence in her life. Now, it was all she could think about. And miles away, Keanu sat alone in his apartment, his guitar resting beside him. He didn't play it. He just sat there, lost in thought, the quiet room holding the echo of her voice. He thought about what he hadn't said, that maybe what he loved most about her wasn't just her kindness or her humor, but the way she made him feel like life could still surprise him. He whispered softly to himself, as if saying it to the night. "She still makes the world feel gentle." But before the words could fade, his phone buzzed. A message from Sandra. "You didn't ask what I love most about you." He smiled, typing back slowly. "What do you love most about me, Sandra?" There was a pause. Then her reply came, the same thing you said. "The way you make people feel safe." Keanu read the message twice, maybe 3 times, and in that quiet apartment he smiled. Not the kind the cameras saw, but the one that came from somewhere real, somewhere soft. He put the phone down, leaned back, and closed his eyes. For the first time in years, his heart didn't feel heavy. It felt awake. But deep inside, another thought formed, a question that wouldn't leave him. What if the world wasn't ready for what they felt? And what if neither of them were ready to face what their hearts already knew? When the heart remembers quietly, the following days passed like slow-moving light, calm on the surface yet full of quiet movement beneath. The picture from the reunion had spread online. Fans wrote thousands of comments about their chemistry, their smiles, their history. Some said it looked like old love returning. Others said it was friendship shining after years. But neither Keanu nor Sandra replied to any post. Both knew that the real story lived far away from the noise of the internet. Sandra spent that week finishing a small project, but her mind often drifted. When she closed her eyes between scenes, she could still hear his voice. She told herself it was harmless, just old memories finding space again. Yet every time she tried to focus, she remembered his words under the fading light. "The thing I love most about you is how you make people feel safe." Those words had rooted somewhere deep, not because of what they meant, but because of how gently he said them. No show, no act, no agenda. Just truth, raw and simple. On Friday evening, she received a call. His name appeared on the screen. "Hey," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, his tone as calm as ever. "Are you busy tomorrow?" "Depends," she said with a light laugh. "Why?" Thought we could continue that walk, he said. No cameras this time. Just the hills, maybe coffee after. She paused. You really like walking, don't you? Walking helps me listen better, he said. She smiled to herself. Then I'll bring good stories. See you at 10? 10's perfect. The next morning was bright but quiet, the kind of day that felt like a gentle beginning. Sandra arrived early. The park path was still damp from the night's drizzle, the air cool and clean. When Keanu appeared wearing the same black jacket and that familiar calm, she felt something steady inside her shift again. You're early, he said with a grin. You're later than usual, she teased. I figured I'd let you win at something today, he said, and they both laughed softly. They walked in easy rhythm, no need for constant words. The trees above filtered sunlight into soft golden patches, and the sound of birds echoed faintly in the distance. For a long stretch they said nothing, yet it felt full of quiet understanding, of a peace that didn't need filling. Finally, Sandra broke the silence. You ever think about how strange life is? Always, he said. It teaches you things you weren't ready to learn, then tests if you still remember them later. And what lesson are you remembering now? She asked. That the best things never shout, he said. She smiled faintly. You mean like friendship? Maybe like that, he said. Or like truth. They reached a small wooden bench overlooking the city. She sat first and he followed. For a few minutes, they just watched the clouds drift over distant rooftops. Sandra's voice softened. You know what I find strange? We spent years together on sets, shared late nights, even cried during scenes that felt too real. But only now we're really talking. Sometimes time has to wear people down before it lets them be honest, Keanu said. You make honesty sound painful, she whispered. It can be, he said. But it's also freedom. She looked at him, her eyes curious. What would you say if someone asked you what freedom means to you? He thought for a moment. Not pretending to be okay when you're not. Her gaze fell to the ground. That's something I've forgotten how to do. Keanu turned to her, his tone gentler. You don't have to carry everything alone, Sandra. I'm not, she said quickly, though her voice betrayed her. You are, he said softly. I can see it. The words broke something fragile inside her. For years she had been the strong one, the one people leaned on, the one who smiled through pain, the one who kept moving forward even when her heart wanted to stop. But now, sitting beside someone who truly saw her, she felt the strength quietly dissolve into honesty. Maybe I got used to pretending, she admitted. Sometimes it's easier than explaining. I know, he said quietly. That's why silence feels like home sometimes. She looked at him again. So what do you do with that silence? I fill it with gratitude, he said simply. For what stayed. For who stayed, her heart softened. And I stayed, didn't I? You did, he said, meeting her eyes. Even when life pulled us into different storms. They stayed like that for a long moment. The quiet between them deep and real. No performance, no pretending. Just two souls that understood each other in a way the world rarely allows. A soft breeze moved her hair, and he reached out without thinking, tucking a loose strand behind her ear. His fingers brushed lightly against her skin, and she didn't pull away. She looked at him, her heart thudding softly. Keanu, she whispered, why do you always look at people like you're afraid they'll disappear? His expression changed slightly. Because people do. The answer hit her harder than she expected. He continued quietly. I've lost enough to know that nothing lasts forever. But that doesn't mean I stop caring. You still believe in love? She asked. He took a breath. I believe in what it teaches, even when it breaks. And what did it teach you? That loving someone doesn't mean owning them. It means seeing them as they are and still choosing kindness. She stared at him, realizing that everything about him, his quiet nature, his patience, his gentleness, came from a place of deep understanding, not absence. For a moment, she wanted to say something honest back, something she had never admitted even to herself. But her words stopped halfway, trapped between fear and truth. So she stood instead, brushing off her jeans. Come on, she said softly. You owe me coffee. He smiled and stood with her. You're right. I did promise. The cafe was small, tucked in a quiet corner of the city, filled with soft jazz and the smell of roasted beans. They found a seat near the window. No one seemed to notice them. This feels normal, she said. That's why I like it, he replied. When the waiter brought their drinks, Sandra stirred her coffee absent-mindedly. You ever think about how strange it is that we never dated? She said suddenly, half joking, half serious. Keanu looked up, slightly surprised but amused. People have asked me that for years. And what do you tell them? That some connections are too valuable to risk breaking. That's a safe answer, she said. No, he replied. That's an honest one. She studied him for a moment. You're afraid it would ruin the friendship? He nodded slightly. Sometimes friendship is love without the need to prove it. She smiled softly. And sometimes love hides behind friendship because it's safer there. His eyes met hers, and for a few seconds, everything around them went still. Maybe both can be true, he said quietly. They didn't talk much after that. They just sat there. Two old friends who had seen too much life to rush what didn't need rushing. When they finally stepped outside, the afternoon sun painted everything gold. Sandra stopped near the corner, looking at him carefully. Keanu, she said slowly, if I asked you something personal, would you answer honestly? If I can, he said. She hesitated. What do you think we mean to each other? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the sunlight on the pavement, then back at her. We mean peace, he said finally. And that's not something you find twice. The words sank into her heart like quiet rain. Before she could reply, someone called out from across the street. Fans, phones raised, flashes starting to blink. Instinctively, Keanu stepped a little closer to shield her from the crowd. His body language was protective, natural. The fans shouted their names, snapping pictures, asking questions. But Keanu didn't move until she was safely in her car. She rolled down the window, smiling at him. Thank you, she said softly. Always, he replied. As she drove away, the crowd still calling behind him, Keanu stayed on the sidewalk for a long time. He didn't wave, didn't smile for cameras. He just stood there, watching her car disappear again into the city that always wanted too much from both of them. And when he finally turned to leave, he whispered to himself, I hope the world never steals her peace. That night, both of them couldn't sleep. Sandra sat by her window looking at the sky, wondering if she had imagined the connection or if it had truly deepened. Meanwhile, Keanu sat in his quiet apartment again, reading her text from the night before, the one where she said you make people feel safe. He typed a new message but didn't send it. You make me believe love can still be gentle. He deleted it. Then he typed again. Are you free tomorrow? I have something to show you. This time, he pressed send. A few moments later, her reply came. Yes. Where? He smiled. Somewhere peaceful. The next day, they would meet again, this time not in public. Not in the city, but somewhere far quieter. Somewhere that would reveal more than either expected. Somewhere where the truth could no longer hide behind silence. Where the truth waited quietly, the morning sun came slowly, spreading pale light across Los Angeles. The sky was clear, the streets half awake. Sandra looked at her phone again, reading his last message. Somewhere peaceful. It was such a Keanu kind of phrase. Simple, quiet, and full of hidden meaning. She didn't ask where. She trusted him. So when his car stopped in front of her house an hour later, she stepped outside without hesitation. Keanu smiled as she approached, dressed simply, his eyes calm but thoughtful. Ready for a small escape? He asked. Always, she replied. The drive was long but silent in the best way. The city faded behind them, replaced by soft hills and long stretches of empty road. Music played low in the background, gentle guitar notes that matched the rhythm of their thoughts. You always drive toward quiet places, Sandra said after a while. Maybe because noise reminds me of what I lost, he said softly. She looked at him, hearing a sadness in his tone she hadn't before. And what did you lose, Keanu? He hesitated, his fingers tightening slightly on the steering wheel. Pieces of people I loved. Moments I can't get back. Sometimes silence is the only way to talk to them again. Sandra turned her gaze to the window, watching the landscape blur. She understood more than she wanted to admit. "Grief has a strange language," she whispered. "It does," he said. "But it also teaches you how to listen differently." They drove another half hour before the road narrowed into a path surrounded by tall trees. At the end of it stood a small cabin near a lake, still and shimmering under the morning light. "This is beautiful," she said, stepping out. "It's where I go when I need to breathe," he said. "No cameras, no noise, no questions," she smiled gently. "You brought me here to breathe with you?" "Maybe," he said, half smiling. "Or maybe I brought you here because there are things I can only say in silence." His words lingered in the cool air, soft and heavy at the same time. They walked toward the lake. The water was calm, the reflection of the sky flawless. A few ducks floated nearby, and the sound of wind in the trees filled the stillness between them. For a long while, neither spoke. Sandra sat on the wooden deck, letting her feet hover above the water. Keanu sat beside her, the quiet stretching like a thread between two hearts that understood too much. "You know," she said finally, "I used to think peace was something you had to chase. Now I think it's something you let find you." He nodded slowly. "Peace finds you when you stop fighting what's gone." She turned to look at him. "You say that like someone who's made peace with a lot." He looked at the lake. "Some days I have. Other days I just pretend." Sandra's expression softened. "You don't have to pretend with me." He met her eyes, and for a long second, there was something in his gaze that felt almost fragile. "That's why you're here," he said quietly. Her breath caught slightly. "What do you mean?" "You asked me once what we mean to each other," he said, "and I didn't tell you the full truth. I said we mean peace, but it's more than that." The world seemed to slow. Even the sound of the wind softened. "Then what do we mean, Keanu?" she asked. He took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to lift years of silence. "You're the person who reminds me it's still okay to care. The world takes so much, and people change when they lose too much. But you stayed kind, and that's the kind of love I still believe in." Her eyes glistened. "You think this is love?" He smiled faintly. "Not the kind people write about. The kind that heals without needing to be named." She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her heart felt both full and weightless, as if hearing something it had waited years to feel. They sat in silence again. The lake shimmered, and the sunlight touched their faces softly. After a while, she said quietly, "You know what I love most about you?" "What?" he asked, almost afraid to hear it. "You don't try to impress anyone. You make people believe that being real is enough." He smiled, looking down at the water. "That's because it's all I know how to be." "And that's why people love you," she said. He looked at her again. "And that's why I'm afraid of them," he whispered. "Afraid?" She asked softly. "Afraid they'll turn kindness into a headline?" he said. "Afraid they'll take what's simple and make it complicated." Sandra reached out and touched his hand. "They can't take what's real," she said. "Not if you hold it quietly." He looked at their hands, hers resting gently on his, fingers light but certain. "Maybe that's what this is," he said softly. "Something real we hold quietly." The air grew still again, the kind of stillness that carries too many feelings without words. Sandra's eyes glistened, not from sadness, but from the weight of everything unspoken. "I don't know what this is," she said finally. "Friendship, love, or just something we'll never name. But I know it feels like home." Keanu's lips curved in a faint smile. "Then maybe that's enough." They stayed by the lake until the sun began to lower. The sky turned golden, then orange, then a deep pink that reflected over the calm surface. As they walked back to the cabin, the air smelled of pine and distant rain. Inside, Keanu lit a small fire, and they sat across from each other, the light flickering between their faces. "You've always been like this," she said softly. "You listen more than you talk. Maybe because Words can hurt if you use too many, he said, and yet the right ones can heal, she said. You always know how to find the right ones, he replied. She smiled faintly. Only when I feel safe, so you feel safe now? He asked. She nodded slowly. Yes, and that scares me a little. Why? Because every time I feel safe, life finds a way to take it away. Keanu looked at her, his voice steady. Then maybe this time, we hold on tighter. For a moment, they both looked into the fire. It crackled softly, throwing warm light across the room. You know, she said, her tone thoughtful, people think we live perfect lives. They don't see how lonely it gets. They see the lights, he said, not the silence after they fade. And what do you do when the silence feels too heavy? I find someone who makes it lighter, he said gently. Their eyes met again. It was not a look of longing, but of quiet recognition, something deep, something timeless. After a while, Sandra stood and walked toward the small window. The lake glowed faintly under the moonlight now, the ripples soft and slow. It's beautiful here, she said, softly. It's peaceful. He replied. Peaceful feels fragile, she said, only if you're afraid of breaking it, he said. She turned to look at him, her expression tender. And are you? He hesitated. Maybe not anymore, she smiled. Good. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them like an unspoken promise. Then, quietly, she walked closer. Keanu, she said, what happens if we stop pretending this is just friendship? His heart seemed to slow. Then we'll have to tell the truth. And what's the truth? She asked. That I've cared about you longer than I ever admitted, he said quietly. That every time I see you smile, I remember what hope feels like. Her eyes shimmered. That's a dangerous truth. Maybe, he said. But some truths are worth the risk. She didn't speak again. Instead, she stepped closer until she could feel his warmth. Her hand brushed his arm lightly, uncertain but brave. He didn't move, didn't rush, just breathed in slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. For the first time, the silence between them wasn't a wall. It was an answer. But before either could speak again, Keanu's phone buzzed on the table. The sound broke the spell. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted slightly. Everything okay? She asked. He hesitated, eyes still on the phone. It's a message from a journalist. They somehow found out we're here. Her heart dropped. Already? He nodded slowly. Someone must have seen the car. They're asking if this is a romantic trip? Sandra sighed, her eyes closing briefly. And here I thought peace would last longer than a day. Keanu placed the phone face down on the table. Don't worry, he said quietly. We'll handle it. She looked at him. How? He smiled faintly. By doing what we always do. Staying kind. Her shoulders relaxed and she smiled back, but her eyes still carried worry. You know, she said softly, I don't care what they call it. Friendship, love, or madness, as long as it's real. Keanu nodded. It is. They sat by the fire again, side by side, watching the flames move. The night outside grew deeper, but between them, something stayed bright, yet both knew that once morning came, the world would knock again, louder this time, more curious, less gentle, and when it did, their quiet truth would no longer belong only to them. When peace met the noise, morning came quietly, but it didn't stay gentle for long. Keanu woke early, the soft light spilling across the wooden cabin walls. For a few moments, everything was calm. The lake still, the air cool, the faint sound of birds outside. He looked over at the couch near the fire, where Sandra had fallen asleep last night. She looked peaceful, her head resting on the pillow, her hand loosely holding a folded blanket. He smiled faintly. In that quiet hour, before the world woke, it felt like time had finally slowed enough to let them breathe. But then his phone buzzed again, this time not just once. Messages began flooding in, alerts, emails, missed calls. Headlines flashing in his notifications. He unlocked the screen, and his chest tightened. Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves spotted on secret getaway. A romantic escape or private project? Inside their weekend retreat. Exclusive. Fans claim they saw the pair holding hands near a cabin lake. His heart sank. Not because the words were cruel, but because they were careless. They made something fragile sound like a performance. He turned the phone face down again, not wanting to read more. A few minutes later, Sandra stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the light. She looked at him, noticing the quiet tension on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then handed her the phone. She read the headlines in silence, her lips pressed together, her shoulders tightening slightly. "So it begins," she whispered. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have parked somewhere else." "Don't apologize," she said. "We both knew peace doesn't last long in our world," he sighed. "Still, I wanted this to stay ours a little longer." She looked at him, her voice gentle. "It still is. The world only gets what we let it see." For a moment they both sat in silence, the fire's last embers flickering faintly. Then Sandra stood, walking toward the window. Outside, the lake reflected the morning light, calm and unaware of the noise waiting beyond the trees. "You know what hurts the most?" she said softly. "It's not that they're talking. It's that they'll turn something honest into a story that isn't." "They always do," he said quietly. "They turn kindness into mystery, silence into secrecy." She turned back to him. "And love into headlines." He stood beside her. "But they can't name what they don't understand." She smiled faintly. "You really believe that?" "I have to," he said. "Otherwise, I'd stop being me." They left the cabin a few hours later. By then, the photographers had found the road. Cars lined the entrance, flashes already going off from a distance. Keanu stepped out first, calm as always, his hand slightly raised as if to signal peace. Sandra followed close behind, wearing sunglasses, her expression composed but distant. Reporters shouted questions. "Are you two in love?" "Is this confirmation?" "Are you finally together after all these years?" Keanu didn't answer. He opened the car door for her, a simple gesture that spoke louder than any headline could. She got in quietly, her eyes avoiding the cameras. The drive back was long and silent. She looked out the window most of the time, and he didn't interrupt her thoughts. Sometimes words aren't comfort, they're just noise added to noise. After an hour, she finally spoke. "It's strange, isn't it? We say a few honest words to each other, and the world turns them into something they can sell. That's why I stopped explaining myself years ago," he said softly. "Truth doesn't need convincing. It just needs patience." "You really are the calmest person I've ever known," she said, her tone a mix of admiration and sadness. "Calm doesn't mean unaffected," he said. "I just learned that reacting doesn't change anything." She looked at him, her voice quieter. "But it still hurts, doesn't it?" He met her gaze. "It always does when something real gets misunderstood." By evening, both their phones were full of missed calls. Agents, friends, journalists, all wanting statements. Sandra sat in her living room, scrolling through the flood of articles. Some were kind, others curious, and a few cruel. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Then, without overthinking, she called him. He picked up on the first ring. Hey, she said. Her voice was steady but soft. "You holding up?" "Trying," he said. "You?" "Doing the same," she replied. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavier than before, but also more necessary. "You think we should say something?" she asked. "To who?" he said quietly. "The world," she said. He paused. "Maybe not yet. Maybe we let them guess for once. Let them see what happens when silence doesn't break." She smiled faintly through the phone. "You always make it sound so easy." "It's not," he said. "But peace is sometimes found in not fighting every battle." "And if they twist it?" she asked. "Then we'll remind each other what's real," he said simply. His words soothed her more than she expected. For a while, they just stayed on the line, not talking, not filling the space, just breathing together through the static. The next day, the story grew bigger. TV hosts discussed it, fans debated online, and every photo from the lake was analyzed like a secret message. Sandra avoided interviews. Keanu turned down appearances. Both chose silence over spectacle. But the silence made the world even louder. Rumors started to shift. One magazine claimed she had ended another relationship for him. Another insisted they were hiding a proposal. And somewhere in between the lies, their quiet truth got buried deeper. It was late one night when Sandra's manager called. "They're running a cover story," she said. "They're saying Keanu admitted he's in love with you." Sandra froze. "Did he?" "No." "They twisted an old quote from years ago," her manager said. "But it's spreading fast." Sandra hung up, her heart racing. She picked up her phone, opened social media, and saw it everywhere. Screenshots, posts, edits, people turning speculation into certainty. She didn't know what hurt more, the false story or the thought that Keanu might think she doubted him, so she called him again. This time, his voice sounded tired. "I saw it," he said before she could speak. "I know," she said softly. "I'm sorry. You don't have to be," he said. "I just wish people would let kindness exist without a headline. Do you regret it?" She asked suddenly. "Bringing you there?" he said. "Never." "Even after this?" "Especially after this," he said. "Because the world's noise only proves that what we had was real enough to make them curious." Her voice trembled slightly. "You make it sound like we should thank them for the chaos," he smiled faintly. "Maybe not thank them, but maybe remember that peace isn't something they can steal unless we hand it over." She breathed deeply. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "we keep doing what we were doing. Living, caring quietly, being ourselves. And if they never stop," she whispered, "then we stay quiet louder than they can shout." His calm made her smile. "You really believe that'll work?" "Maybe not," he said, "but I believe in us." There was a pause. Then she said softly, "That's the first time you said us." He smiled gently through the line. "It won't be the last." The next morning, something unexpected happened. A fan posted a short clip of them at the cabin, just a few seconds of them sitting by the lake talking quietly. No drama, no grand gestures, only two people sharing silence. The caption said, "This doesn't look like scandal. This looks like peace." And within hours, that post went viral. People began to comment differently. "They deserve privacy. They look so peaceful. Let them be." It wasn't everyone. The noise was still there. But for the first time, the world's tone began to soften. Keanu texted her that evening. "Maybe silence is louder than I thought," she replied. "Or maybe people finally heard the truth hiding in it." He smiled, sitting by his window, the sky dimming outside. He typed again. "How are you feeling now?" "Lighter," she replied. "Like peace might come back after all." He leaned back, closing his eyes. For the first time in days, he felt it too. That fragile, beautiful quiet they both fought to protect. But deep inside, he knew peace never lasted long. Not for people who carried hearts the world loved to watch. And he also knew the next step of their story would test not just their calm, but their courage. Because love that stays gentle in chaos is the rarest kind of love there is. The truth they never needed to hide. A week passed. The storm began to settle, though the world still whispered. News cycles moved on, chasing other stories, other names. But for Keanu and Sandra, the quiet that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Sandra spent the first few days avoiding screens. She read books, watered her plants, and walked her dog through the same park where they had first spoken after the reunion. Every path, every tree seemed to hold a memory now. The world had called it a scandal, a romance, a reunion. But for her, it had always been something simpler, something honest. One evening, as the sky began to darken, she received a text. "Meet me where the silence began." No name, no need. She knew. When she arrived at the small park by the lake, Keanu was already there. He stood near the water, dressed in his usual simplicity. Dark jacket, calm posture, quiet smile. She walked toward him slowly. "So this is where it all began again," she said softly. "Seems like it," he said. "And maybe where it needs to end too." "End?" she repeated, a faint ache in her chest. "Not us," he said quickly. "Just the noise. I think it's time we stop letting others write our story." She smiled. And how do we do that? By telling it ourselves, he said. She raised an eyebrow. You want to tell them? He shook his head. Not them. Each other. They sat on the same wooden bench overlooking the water. The lake reflected the fading sunlight, golden and calm. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Keanu said quietly, You once asked me what I loved most about you. I told you it was how you make people feel safe. But that wasn't the whole truth. Her eyes turned toward him, soft but curious. Then what was? What I really love most about you, he said slowly, is that you see the world with kindness, even after it's been unkind to you. You make broken things look beautiful again, and somehow you make me believe I can be one of them. She felt tears sting her eyes, not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen so clearly. That's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said to me, she whispered. It's just the truth, he said. She smiled faintly through her tears. Then I guess it's my turn. He looked at her quietly, listening the way he always did, with full attention. No interruption. What I love most about you, she said, her voice trembling slightly, is that you never ask for attention, but you always deserve it. You give without keeping score. You love people quietly without needing to be noticed. And in a world that rewards loudness, you remind me that silence can still change hearts. His eyes softened, a faint shimmer in them that the setting sun caught gently. Thank you, he said softly. They sat together, the light fading into gold and orange, the world around them slowing down again. After a while, she said, Do you think the world will ever understand this? Maybe not, he said. But that's okay. We didn't do this for them. Then what did we do it for? She asked. He smiled faintly. For peace. For truth. For whatever we were too afraid to lose. She nodded slowly, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had always been meant to rest that way. The breeze moved gently, carrying the sound of the water brushing against the shore. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't grand, just quiet and real. You know, she said, I used to think love had to be loud to be real. But now I think the loudest love is the kind that doesn't need words. Maybe that's the only kind that lasts, he said. They smiled at each other, the moment heavy with peace. A few weeks later, both appeared together at a charity event. It was their first public appearance since the rumors. The cameras waited, expecting a grand statement, but they gave none. They arrived side by side, walked quietly, greeted people with warmth, and answered questions with grace. A reporter finally asked, So what's the real story between you two? Sandra looked at Keanu, smiling softly. He returned the smile, then said calmly, The real story is kindness. That's it. And they walked away, leaving the cameras behind. That moment went viral again, but this time for different reasons. People shared it not for gossip, but for the grace it carried. Kindness. That's it. The world finally started to understand. A month later, back at the same lake cabin, they returned, not to hide, but to breathe. The evening light danced on the water again. Sandra stood by the dock, watching the ripples. Keanu came up behind her quietly. We made it through, he said. We did, she said, smiling. And it didn't break us. No, he said softly. It made us real. She turned, looking at him with the same gentle warmth she had carried since the first day they met. You think peace can last this time? He smiled. Only if we protect it. She took his hand. Then let's protect it. They stood there together, the world silent around them, the lake shimmering like a mirror for everything they had been through. Fame, loss, misunderstanding, truth, and love that didn't need to shout to be heard. For once, there were no cameras, no rumors, no interruptions, only two souls, quietly grateful for finding each other again in a world that had tried to pull them apart. And as the sun set over the still water, Keanu said softly, You know, if anyone ever asks again what I love most about you, she smiled, finishing his thought. You'll tell them it's everything, won't you? He laughed softly. No, I'll tell them it's the way you made silence feel like home. Her eyes glistened. Then I guess we finally found it. What? He asked. Home, she whispered. The wind moved gently through the trees. carrying the sound of calm water and fading light. And in that moment, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock didn't need words, headlines, or explanations anymore. They had already said everything that mattered.